Welcome to Galar, where the fights are big and the Pokemon are bigger, all thanks to a 5-headed Eldritch being from beyond the stars. The Dynamax Phenomena warps both space and time itself, turning your average Pokemon into absolutely massive Daikaiju fit to destroy entire cities. And some transform even further, the Galar particles affecting them as they become their Gigantamax form, gaining newfound powers. From controlling the minds of entire populations to having fists that hold the power of bomb blasts with every strike, and the strange case of blue Dynamax Calyrex. There are quite a few questions that need answering, and curious as to the secrets behind this phenomena, I've teamed up with Sonia to dig through the history of Galar, solve its secrets, and explain the nuclear power of all of our G-Max Pokemon. Howdy there, I'm Krillic, and we're going to leave no stone unturned, as we are going to do more than just explaining every single special G-Max Pokemon. We're also going to be looking into the inspirations behind Dynamaxing and Gigantamaxing, and why they happen on a deeper level, while also using real-life science and history when applicable to explain this phenomena and any of the G-Max Pokemon in their entirety. So how about we begin with a little history of Galar. 20,000 years prior to the events of Pokemon Sword and Shield, a meteorite containing Eternatus fell in Galar. This meteor, as we now understand it, would become the Max Lair, or rather would create the Max Lair, in which we find a slew of legendary Pokemon. This is something that I want you to keep in mind for later. Now, this impact itself doesn't really line up with any major meteoric events or impacts in the real world, but it does line up with the last 2,000 years of the Glacial Maxim. As this period of time came to a close, the Earth warmed up, seas rose, and early human settlements were beginning to be built. It's through this that artistic expression started to become more of a thing as well. I bring this up because there are images carved into the lands of Galar itself with rough depictions of what we understand to be the Dynamax or G-Max phenomena, or even other tapestries throughout the lands, but that comes in a little bit later. One particular piece of art, though, that is carved into the lands is compared to being G-Max Toxtricity, who we will talk about later. Again, though, this is not to say that every single piece of art within Galar occurred 20,000 years ago. It's just important to understand that Galar's history is held in their artwork, which was hidden away, and we'll get to that soon enough. Now, 3,000 years prior to the modern day, Eternatus awakened for the first time and started an event known as the Darkest Day, causing a black storm to spread across Galar. But Eternatus was stopped by two humans and the legendary heroes, resulting in the boys being crowned as the kings of the region. During the battle, pieces of Eternatus' body were scattered across the region, giving origin to the Wishing Pieces and Wishing Stars, and consequently, to the creation of Dynamax bands. Statues of the two kings and the two Pokemon were also built at some point in Stowonside, and over time, these wolves, our wonderful legendary Pokemon, were forgotten to time. Also, thank you, Professor Magnolia, for your contributions. I'll note that, interestingly enough, she has an antique form of both Sinistea and Poltergeist in the manga, while also having taken in Eternatus after the big event for a while within the anime before Leon was entrusted to take care of Eternatus himself. But back on track, now it's between this point in time and the rediscovery of an injured Calyrex that history starts to get incredibly muddled within Galar. To be fair, what we have discussed already is a bit of a mess. I say this because there are tapestries that we can find within Galar that show that there really were two heroes rather than just one, as people were led to believe over time. Sonia is really the one to have discovered or make notice of it. Also, if I switch between Sonia and Sonia, I apologize, it's a name. And through the Pokemon Adventures manga, we come to learn that at least in the modern day, Chairman Rose was working with the royal brothers, Swordward and Shieldbert, to cover up history as we know it and make them out to be the heroes of the modern day. Back to this lost age of time, though, as Calyrex is an important piece of this puzzle. Because while we understand it eventually grew to rule benevolently over the Crown Tundra, it is directly stated, at least in the manga chapter much Munch, the mysterious carrot, that Calyrex participated in the first Darkest Day, where it met Eternatus for the first time. And while it is not directly stated, I would even bet that the Fairy King not only teamed up with Zacian and Zamazenta, but that it also worked alongside both forms of Urshifu in this fight. At the very least, we can confirm that Calyrex worked with Zacian, as the crowned form Zacian Dex entry states, able to cut down anything with a single strike. It became known as the Fairy King's Sword, and it inspired awe in friend and foe alike. Meanwhile, Zamazenta's crowned entry states its ability to deflect any attack led it to being known as the Fighting Master's Shield. It was feared and respected by all. The Fighting Master being Urshifu, who becomes a Master of Martial Arts through the Scrolls of Mastery. Also, its name is literally Ursa, as in bear, and Shifu for Master. And yes, that means that Master Shifu in Kung Fu Panda is Master, like Chai Tea. You know, throw the Spider-Man meme in there. And we know that both Zacian and Zamazenta were vital on the Darkest Day, so it is very safe to assume that they were all involved in some capacity with each other in that pivotal fight. Unfortunately, nobody would make it out of that fight unscathed. But before we continue, it is also vital to note that Zacian and Zamazenta cannot Dynamax. We can explain this lore-wise by understanding that they, alongside Calyrex, may have existed in these lands and matured before Eternatus arrived in Galar. And I'll return to my reasoning on this later before we go through all of our individual Pokemon, because this will also explain why Urshifu still can Gigantamax. But the strangest of them all is that when Calyrex Dynamaxes, it has a blue aura as opposed to the red aura that all other Pokemon get. To help us understand why, we have to understand that Calyrex is incredibly unique in the fact that it directly states, in its own words, that it was once worshipped, and through the worship that it received from the people of Galar, it held great power. It would then provide back to the people, becoming king of the bountiful harvest, as it could grant endless green vegetation and even ripen the fruits and vegetables of the land. But eventually, over time, as with everything else, the people of Galar would forget of Calyrex's existence. It would lose its power, and it would be weakened. Why they would forget its existence is incredibly strange, because once again, we know it fought Eternamax at some point. Then it would have been weakened and brought back to health during its time in the Crown Tundra, wherein it was worshipped until eventually that fell. It would be here in these lands that it truly ruled after it tamed Glastrier and Spectrier, putting an end to their reigns of terror, which there's a pun to be had there, reign of terror, like horse reigns, which Calyrex would literally create in order to control the horses. Yet despite everything that they had done, Calyrex, the two heroes, Zacian and Zamazenta, they would all be forgotten. And that's strange, because Calyrex is basically the Jesus of Pokemon, because more than bringing bountiful harvests, it moved an entire forest to keep it safe from a disaster, and it could provide healings or blessings such as mending the heart. While it shows no mercy to those that stand in its way, it will heal the wounds of a foe afterwards. It is literally turning the other cheek, all while bearing what you may recognize as the Triforce upon its beads. Even those beads are reminiscent of prayer beads, as you would see in Buddhism. The Triforce, as we understand it through Legend of Zelda, is meant to represent power, wisdom, and courage, though this symbol is also that of the Hojo clan of Japan, who existed between 1203 and 1333, and relevant to what we see here, the Hojo clan are known for fostering Zen Buddhism. So in fact, it would be more apt to call Calyrex the Buddha of Pokemon, and it's thanks to all of this, through the power it receives through the worship, that Calyrex is able to Dynamax in its own way, giving it that blue outline and separating itself from the power of Eternatus itself, as all other Pokemon who Dynamax in some capacity will gain that red outline. I have to admit now though, when I first started making Pokemon videos, I never thought I would be learning about religion and philosophy through Pokemon and finding out all those inspirations from those subjects, but here we are. And it's something I've realized that is not even all that hidden. It's actually pretty incredibly obvious when we take just a moment to slow down and look at the symbolism or the designs of a lot of these Pokemon, where they're found and what animals they're based on, just as a start. And one of these days, I'm just going to have to dig into the complete history of every region as its own little timeline series. But for now, how about we begin talking about the great big terror that is Eternamax. Just in case you didn't play Sword and Shield, Eternamax is the full-powered form of Eternatus. It is the form it takes when it has actually absorbed all of its energy back or has recollected all of the energy it has released, being the Wishing Stars and Galar particles that we mentioned earlier. Now, there are a lot more inspirations for Eternatus, such as the multi-headed serpent interpreted to appear in the end times, but I would rather focus on its connection to radiation and Daikaiju, otherwise known as Giant Strange Beast in its direct translation. Yes, you heard me correct. Daikaiju literally means Giant Strange Beast, while Kaiju is just Strange Beast, which is exactly what Pokemon are, as they are pocket monsters. And once again, it was sitting right in front of our faces as Dynamax draws from the same prefix of Dai. This also allows us to look at the most popular Daikaiju of all time, Godzilla, or arguably one of the most popular of all time. And I know it sounds like we are going way off the beaten path, but bear with me because it does all connect together really easily. Godzilla was inspired by the devastation of nuclear warfare, particularly the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and symbolizes the destructive power of humanity's technological advancements. And Godzilla, originally known as Gojira, first appeared in the 1954 film directed by Ishiro Honda. The character was created in the aftermath of World War II, specifically as a response to the horrors of nuclear warfare. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 left a profound impact on Japanese society, leading to fears about nuclear power and its potential for destruction. Godzilla was conceived as a metaphor for these fears, representing the catastrophic consequences of humanity's scientific advancements gone awry. And to loop all of that back around, Dynamax energy through Galar particles are used as the major source of energy throughout Galar, which is also funny. I don't have it in my script here, but there are 3 types of particles. It's like alpha, beta, gamma particles. They're, I think, the major particles. I want to say that there's more, but those are the only things that come off, the noggin here as I'm thinking about radiation and how those 3 different type of particles just kind of exist. Meanwhile, here in Galar, we just have the singular particle. Though it was what Chairman Rose would fear would eventually run out, and was too impatient, likely due to his connection with royalty, to listen to reason and wait for a better day or method rather than just pumping Eternatus full of its Galar particles and Wishing Stars in order to bring it back to full power, so that way he could have it produce more of these particles again. And yes, it is through Eternatus becoming Eternamax that it is able to somehow produce even more energy than before, and technically in limitless amounts. These particles have rained down upon the lands of Galar, and not only have they created dens of power, they irradiate Pokemon to allow them to become Dynamax or G-Max forms. And then, here's my favorite part of this. Max mushrooms. I hate the fact that they had to be included in a DLC so that way I could transform the Pokemon I already had into their G-Max forms. I should have just been able to transform them, but that's neither here nor there. The mushrooms in lore are really fun because they have the power of changing Dynamax forms. They boost all the stats of a Pokemon as well during battle, and a single cluster will spawn after 3 max raid battles. After a big fight between 2 nuclear warheads, essentially, is how I'm going to describe it. This relates to a real phenomenon called radiotrophic fungi, which are fungi that can perform the biological process called radiosynthesis, which means using ionizing radiation as a main energy source to drive metabolization. It has been claimed that radiotrophic fungi have been found in extreme environments, such as in the Chernobyl nuclear power plants. So at this point, it is pretty basically clear as day that the entire Dynamax Phenomena is a play on the idea of radiation and Daikaiju. But why does this only affect Pokemon? Why does it not affect humans in the Pokemon world at all? Well, Other than not wanting to throw in a cancer story at children, which would be pretty rough, it's because Pokemon have a very important power that has been right in front of us all along. Our Pokeballs are not the reason that Pokemon turn into light and enter the Pokeball. That is the innate ability of Pokemon themselves. This is why they can enter the apricorn-based balls, and in one of the original Pocket Monsters guides, it is stated that the first instance in which this occurred is when a Pokemon went inside a glass's case. In other words, Pokemon are beings of energy. They can use energy. This is why they have seemingly infinite bioenergy, and that energy can be harnessed as infinite energy by humanity. How much of their body is composed of energy, we may never truly understand, but by knowing they are beings of energy, we can understand why they can be affected by Dynamaxing at the very least, and actually use it to their advantage. Honestly, this even explains why Pokemon can be gifted the power of Mega Evolution, Z-moves, and terrestrialization. They're all just powers derived from transforming their raw energy into something new, and it can then be granted to someone else. And to round out the rest of Eternatus's information, by technicality, it does not Dynamax or Gigantamax, it just becomes Eternamax as it reaches its full power. Similarly to how Terrapagos technically terrestrializes, but not in the same way that every other Pokemon does. Eternamax's name is just Eternal and Dynamax put together, and its Japanese name is also the same, as it is directly translated to Infinite Dynamax. And the following is also directly stated. This transformation occurs when a Pokemon absorbs massive amounts of energy at once. When in this form, Eternatus releases an infinite amount of energy from its core, resulting in a distortion of space-time. This energy, known as Galar particles, is what results in the Dynamax phenomenon in wild Pokemon. In turn, while Eternatus is absorbing energy, trainer-owned Pokemon are unable to Dynamax themselves. We get to see this effect while we are battling Eternamax. We get to see these effects while we are actually battling Eternamax, even getting to see images of Galar appearing during the battle, showing different locations found within the region. What's most important and interesting to note about this is that its power that causes space-time to distort has been the center of reasoning for why so many legendary and mythical Pokemon may appear within the Max Raid Den. All because Eternamax itself, after spending so much time in its lair, could have caused so large of a distortion that it could have opened legitimate portals between entire alternate universes. And this in turn would have allowed these Pokemon to appear, allowing for multiple legendary Pokemon to enter our world, even if there is only meant to be one, such as Regigigas. Though there's one last bit of information that I found regarding Gmax. Unlike others of their species, Pikachu, Meowth, Eevee, and Duraludon with the Gmax factor cannot evolve. They are also blocked from being transferred to games other than Pokemon Sword and Shield to prevent them from evolving in other games, which isn't that strange? This idea that they can't be traded to another region and then they still cannot evolve no matter what. Any other game just stops moves or abilities from working and essentially forces you to forget the move or some other viable solution. This is one of the few cases in which you are unable to trade a Pokemon to another game due to it having a special ability or feature attached to it. And of course, this special ability is tied to Gmax, a very nuclear ability, which, while this next part is purely speculative, it makes me wonder if this is their way of saying that the radiation has modified the Pokemon's DNA. Which, the more you think about it, the more it would make sense. Not every Pokemon can Gmax. They have to have the Gmax factor, which we have to assume is a DNA-based quality, because radiation itself can then cause cells within the body to become damaged, and if they don't repair themselves, then they may replicate their DNA incorrectly. This would change them forever, and once again, instead of going dark with the idea of cancer, the DNA of our Pokemon is dramatically changed, and they can now Gmax. So with all of this history and basic information and background info out of the way now, we can finally begin to talk about every single Gmax Pokemon, their potential inspirations, and even maybe some fun science when it's applicable. We're going to start with the Pokemon introduced in the main game and then the DLC. So we get to actually begin with Gmax Charizard. Due to it being enhanced by Gmax energy, the fire within its body has become so much stronger, burning hotter than 3600 degrees Fahrenheit or 2000 degrees Celsius, and continuing to rise in temperature when Gmax Charizard roars. To put that into perspective, the melting point of steel is 1425 to 1540 degrees Celsius or 2600 to 2800 degrees Fahrenheit. And while the flames from this massive Pokemon may not initially be melting down everything, with the sheer size of itself, the reach of its flames, and knowing that the flames continue to grow hotter, you and I may just be turned into dried out husks before the flames even reach us and before we would even realize it, especially when we take in the next bit of information, as when it uses its signature move, Gmax Wildfire, which is literally called Kill Die Hellfire in Japanese, so much better in Japanese, it launches its colossal fiery wings in the shape of a bird, which then circles opponents while continuously scorching them with flames even hotter than magma. It does not matter if you block it, this flaming attack will not stop as it keeps you trapped in a fiery vortex. Now there's a problem with this. Magma has a pretty big variable range in terms of its temperature, and according to National Geographic, like solid rock, magma is a mixture of minerals. It also contains small amounts of dissolved gases such as water vapor, carbon dioxide, and sulfur. The high temperatures and pressure under Earth's crust keep magma in its fluid state. There are three basic types of magma: basaltic, andesitic, and rhyolitic, each of which has a different mineral composition. All types of magma have a significant percentage of silicon dioxide. Basaltic magma is high in iron, magnesium, and calcium, but low in potassium and sodium. It ranges in temperatures from about 1000 Celsius to 1200 Celsius, and andesitic magma has moderate amounts of these minerals with a temperature range from about 800 Celsius to 1000 Celsius. Rhyolitic is high in potassium and sodium, low in iron, magnesium, and calcium. It occurs in the temperature range of about 650 to 800 Celsius. Both the temperature and mineral content of magma will affect how easily it also flows. And as such, long story short, all of these magma temperatures are also so much lower than the temperatures in which Gmax Charizard normally functions, which is fine. I guess it's going to be kept at a lower temperature and just maintained so that way it could stay around long enough. But either way, it doesn't really matter because being near temperatures even remotely that high is incredibly dangerous, beyond incredibly dangerous. I've been near a glass blowing furnace, and while standing a good 6 or more feet away, I could still feel the heat warm me up on a cold winter day, to the point where my fiance and I had to stand behind a shield for our own safety. And if you're wondering what I made a little glass turtle on that day. It was nice, and also it's nice because turtles are the meme of the channel. And it turns out that the furnace I was near was about 1300 degrees Celsius, which that means I was fairly close to the temperatures that Gmax Charizard actually releases, though 100-degree difference is actually pretty massive, so I wasn't as close as it seems. But I say this anyway to point out just how hot these temperatures really are and how much of an effect they would have without proper shielding. I was a number of feet away. I wasn't in there. So imagine what that would be like if you were in those stadiums. You would be more than just a dried out husk, you would be melted. And it is also claimed that the form that Gmax Charizard takes is in inspiration from burning Godzilla, especially now that there are flames breaking across its body, and Charizard's wings have now been replaced by these streaks of fire that can be detached and attacked with. This comparison goes deeper as both Gmax Charizard and Gmax Butterfree were revealed together, allowing us to move into our next Pokemon, who represents Mothra. To be fair, there are a number of potential kaiju references as part of this, but that doesn't mean that they are the only inspirations. And of course, Butterfree here even gains a very similar color scheme to what we would have grown to associate Mothra with. Several green scales created from crystallized Gigantamax energy can be seen floating around Gigantamax Butterfree. These are its most effective weapons, capable of causing paralysis, poison, or sleep. Gmax Butterfree scatters these scales by the winds that it generates with each flap of its wings. These winds create a tornado powerful enough to lift a 10-ton truck. It's a bit much to pin down exactly what those wind speeds would be, but it seems as though an EF3 tornado would be able to lift up a truck of that weight. EF3 tornadoes are classified on the Enhanced Fujita scale, which rates tornadoes based on the damage they cause. EF3 tornado has wind speeds ranging from 136 to 165 miles per hour and can cause severe damage, including the destruction of well-built houses and the uprooting of trees. And I don't know about you, but I'm neither stronger than a house nor an entire tree and its roots. I am stronger than a shrub with the right tools. So even if I was, Butterfree is kind of a massive threat, because if the wind doesn't send you flying and the scales don't cause you to die, your only option is to run and look in the opposite direction, because its scales are also said to be blindingly bright. Blinded, toxified, thrown like a ragdoll 30 miles in the opposite direction. Need I remind you that when Gigantamax drops down, it causes Pokemon all over to Dynamax and Gmax? No wonder the Darkest Day was a massive threat. If that spread further than Galar, then the whole world is genuinely in danger, even just by talking about the two Gmax Pokemon we've already mentioned. But I don't really remember that ever being expressed as a problem for some reason, so Its signature move of Gmax Befuddle is known as Kyodai Enchantment, which can cause poison, paralysis, or sleep, which would mean with such a massive area of effect, you can only imagine how chaotically debilitating that would actually be. And before we move on to our next entry, I do have to say that while they are distinctly different creatures, Gmax Butterfree always makes me think of the Moonlight Butterfly from Dark Souls. Chunkachu is back, baby. Look at this adorable little chunkster, the absolute unit that Pikachu becomes once it G-maxes. Its tail becomes longer, it becomes capable of storing all of the electricity it generates, causing it to glow a bright yellow and enabling it to become as powerful as a lightning strike, which, yes, it will be hitting you with its tail, and every single strike is not just a physical impact, but also the full power of lightning slamming down on you, as if the first hit just wasn't bad enough. This is really starting to put into perspective just how impressive it is that Pierce is able to actually battle against these Pokemon without Dynamaxing himself, which is a bit of a shame because I already loved Obstagoon. I'd be down to see it get a special transformation as well. Pikachu's overall power is equal to that of a power plant. However, it is difficult to use it in people's homes, since Pikachu can only remain in its Gigantamax form for a short time. Also, that's like what the game says. I also don't know a home that can fit a multi-10 meter creature inside of it, and I don't really want to find out why does a house that big even exist. There's no reason to. But unfortunately, this also makes sense as to why Rose didn't try to use Pikachu as a source of energy, as we see in other regions, or even in the first episodes of the anime, for emergency energy. The anime does take some fun liberties with this one though, as Pikachu eats a bunch of Gmax Alcremie in the process of it Gigantamaxing, which then results in a frosting mouth Pikachu chonky and beyond happy. And to be entirely fair, I would be happy too. I'd be just as happy if I had that much food to eat suddenly. I don't get tired of food. I could eat the same thing all the time, every day. It is pretty clear what this is a reference to, being the original design for Pikachu before it was thinned out over the years. This was done not to make Pikachu quote-unquote healthier, as Pikachu was very healthy. It was just likely done so that way Pikachu could have better defined features, appendages, and expressions, making it more dynamic and have more poses available to it instead of these stubby little arms that it did have. Its signature move, Volt Crash, directly translated to Heavy Thunder from the Japanese text, has Pikachu fire a bolt of yellow electricity into the clouds above it. Moments later, multiple bolts of lightning shaped like its tail will then strike down from the clouds onto the opponent. I kind of imagine Pikachu calling out to the gods of their own kind, the pantheon of Pikachu, if you would, and then said gods just strike down all at once since, you know, the lightning takes the shape of the tails. We move on, though, to a very interesting case with Meowth. While it becomes the liquid cat that all cats are apt to become when you do pick them up, there's a little bit more to this, because the giant coin on Gigantamax Meowth's head emits a lot of G-Max power that surrounds the area with a golden gleam. Its desire for shiny objects increases to the point where it will cause damage to skyscraper windows and exterior walls for the sake of sharpening its claws. You know, normal cat behavior, just bigger. The symbol on its gold coin is believed to be the key to unlocking the secrets of Dynamaxing. And unfortunately, that symbol on the coin is just the symbol for big in traditional Japanese or Mandarin, it turns out. And while I could make a million jokes about how big isn't much of a secret, I think that's just their way of having fun and saying, yeah, it just makes them big. Good job digging deep, enjoy your long cat. Though this is still important as it ties back to why Meowth even has the coin on its head. Meowth seems to be based on the Japanese legend of the Maneki Neko, also known as the lucky cat or beckoning cat. And according to one legend, a cat raised its paw to welcome a lord, and this saved his life when a lightning bolt hit the spot where he had once been standing. Maneki Neko are often used as charms in restaurants and shops to bring customers fortune and good luck. Statues of the cat are usually depicted holding a koban, an ancient coin used in Japan. I love this idea that some lord loved cats so much that he couldn't just leave one hanging, and so he walked over when it raised its paw for attention, and by pure chance, lightning missed him, then turning this cat into a full-on legend that got statues and everything. It's stupid. I love humans so much when it's stories like this. And you know what? There are a lot of you who watch my videos from around the world. Tell me your favorite legend in the comments. I love legends. I love myths. I love cryptids so much. I want to make a video about how the fairy typing is just a bunch of cryptids, being aliens or celestial beings. Plus, comments are the best free way to help boost the video. That and apparently hype, which is a new thing on YouTube that is stated to really help channels. So hype the video if you're watching this within the first week that it released. To finish out Meowth here, though, its move Gold Rush or Kyodai Koban, further translated to Kyodai Coin, summons multiple gold coins similar in appearance to its forehead charm from underground to damage the opponent. It confuses the opponent and you get to make extra cash. The amount you make is 100 times the user's level and stacks with the amulet coin or luck incense, and if done properly can result in 600 times the user's level in total, though this caps out at a total amount of possibly gaining 99,999 Pokebucks, Pokedollars, whatever you want to call it, which is achievable at level 84 or higher, and will absolutely bankrupt anyone you pull this G-Max move against. Now go out there and bankrupt all the gym leaders as much as your heart desires, people. Or at least within Galar. As Gigantamax Machamp, it swells to enormous proportions and acquires immeasurable strength. Due to G-Maxing, its arms are filled with energy, making its punches as hard as bomb blasts. One of these Pokemon once used its immeasurable strength to lift a large ship that was in trouble, and then carried it to port. And to put this into perspective, regular Machamp is capable of moving an entire mountain with one arm. And of course, I decided that I needed to figure out just how strong regular Machamp is a while ago, and now I bring you those same calculations to try and put G-Max Machamp into perspective here. I used Mount Everest at the time, which may be a bit dramatic, but this is already speculative science anyway, and it seems as though when we look at a lot of Pokemon-based information, a lot of it actually lines up with the largest canyons, the largest mountains, so on and so forth. Now, a number of sources estimate that Mount Everest is about 357 trillion pounds, just a tiny little, anthill, if you would. That is incomprehensible to the human mind, of course, but I'm gonna try doing this anyway, using something a little bit more common. A large car is roughly 4,000 pounds. This means that 87,500,000,000 cars are comparable to the weight of Mount Everest. But of course, that is also still completely out of our ability to mentally imagine, so let me tell you that there is an estimated 1,475,000,000 vehicles in the entire world. Machamp could roughly lift 59 times the number of cars that exist in the entire world on Earth with one hand. With the power of 4 hands, he lifts, what is that number? That is a 1,428,000,000,000,000 pounds. And as much as I wanted to, have that equal to the weight of the Earth or more, it doesn't. In fact, it's pretty far away by human estimates. But nevertheless, that is still basically completely incomprehensible to our minds, but I'm still not done yet. So it takes about 4.45 joules of energy to move 1 pound, 1 meter while on Earth, no matter the direction, as long as we are basically ignoring friction and drag. And when we punch that into a converter, we get a total of 6,354.6 terajoules of energy, which is a little bit more than 72 Fat Man bombs. Which, of course, I had to use the Fat Man bomb. We're talking about nuclear energy, the horrors of war for a while there earlier, and mentioning Nagasaki as one of those destroyed it back then. And now, a singular punch from Gmax Machamp has the power of a bomb blast. One punch. I would be willing to bet that it has literally immeasurable strength, maybe infinite, and might be able to do some absurd feat with it, like, I don't know, playing billiards with the entire solar system. Gigantamax Machamp, appearance-wise, resembles the general depictions of the giants from the Ultraman series, especially with its eyes and head ornaments. These particular warriors are protectors of the universe and often could only be gigantic for a limited time, much like Dynamax as a whole. And this is where another major inspiration of Pokemon may come in, because Ultraman would sometimes capture the kaiju he fought in something called the Capsule Kaiju. The Capsule Kaiju's main purpose is to store a single monster to small sizes, 1 per each capsule. For deployment, it needs to be thrown from a distance to materialize the monster for a minute. Sounds a lot like a Pokeball, doesn't it? Well, that's because this absolutely was one of the many inspirations that went into the creation of Pokemon. Originally, Pocket Monsters was going to be called Capsule Monsters, Kapumon, but since Satoshi Tajiri was running into trouble trademarking, he eventually settled with the name that we have today. In a book called New Game Design, Tajiri goes over some explanation about how Ultra Monsters and Menko cards inspired stuff like the battling and connectivity aspect the games offered. Then we have some stuff found on old beta cartridges and even the manga chronicling of Tajiri's story. One of them mentioning a cut Pokemon called Boo, spelling not confirmed. The creature looked like a male counterpart for Jinx, but it was heavily inspired by Woo from Ultraman. The article even mentions inspiration from Ultraman as part of the process they've used to create Pokemon cries. Thank you, Reddit user Spider Phoenix on the Ultraman subreddit for that. So, more than just helping inspire Dynamax or the Gmax form, Ultraman is another major inspiration for Pokemon as a whole. I could have said this earlier, but I have grown to really enjoy piecemealing information throughout the videos. Now, Machamp's signature, Chi Strike or Kill Die Charge, causes its fist to become surrounded in an orange fist-shaped mass of energy, and it punches the opponents with this. Afterward, its muscles grow in size and its fists become covered in that orange energy, making it able to pinpoint and hit the opponent's weak spots more easily. And that's how they explain the ability to, increase the critical hit rate after this attack. It makes me think of the trope of martial arts masters being able to see chakra or chi points in the body of others, and just by hitting them correctly, it causes the powers of their opponent to be locked away, kind of like as you would see in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Which they also would use this as their way of causing other people to either be debilitated, collapse, you name it. Which, impairment through pressure points is realistic, but death by pressure point is not really a thing to my understanding. This one kind of confuses me a little bit because charge and chi are two vastly different translations, One implies that Machamp is able to attack the Chi, the flow of life force in a Pokemon. Meanwhile, Charge is just charging its ability and allowing it to target weak points, but not necessarily the centers of Chi. I'll just leave this one up to you to interpret and come up with your own belief on this. Ah, yes, my boy Gengar. Its mouth is rumored to not lead into its body, and instead, due to the cursed energy, it is believed to instead lead into the afterlife. By laying a trap, it attempts to steal the lives of others that it captures. Should someone stand near its mouth, then they can hear the voices of their loved ones calling out to them. This is not an exaggeration at any point in that description. This is the flat-out stated truth in the Pokédex, which is a horrifying concept. Imagine being a father to a long-past child, and you hear your own Gengar use the child's voice to ring out from deep within that tunnel of a mouth that it has. And of course it's a tunnel, the long tunnel at the end of your life, though I doubt there's a light at the end of this one. Now, Gmax Gengar may be based on popular depictions of mouth-shaped entryways found in carnivals and amusement park rides, often being horror-themed. Its huge mouth acting as a portal to the afterlife also hints that it may be based on a hellmouth. Thank you, Bulbapedia, but I had never heard of a hellmouth until now. This thing being the literal entrance to hell, envisioned as the gaping mouth of a huge monster. I'm 99% sure my fiance and I walked through one of those when we visited an attraction. It was even the entryway to the next part of said attraction and looked like a devil. The room that we were in before we walked through it had a lot of like religious, angelic depictions as well, so I'm 100% sure that it was a hellmouth at this point, now that I think about it. I walked through a potential inspiration for my favorite Pokemon of all time and didn't even realize it. Now, its signature move, Terror or Phantom, causes Gengar to form multiple giant objects around itself. The objects then glow purple and are hurled at the opponent. When the move hits, the opponent becomes briefly covered in a burst of dark purple and red energy, and rings of purple energy appear around their ankles, preventing them from leaving battle. Mechanically, your Pokemon can't switch out, but this also plays back into the idea of two things. One, just poltergeist throwing things around in rooms, and two, the idea of Gengar being able to teleport in its basic form, travel between dimensions so that way you can't ever hide from it when it's in its mega form, and now it just shackles you to exactly where you are so that way you cannot escape and it then will consume you. My boy in lore for the Pokédex is an absolute demon. If the Geneva Convention was a thing in the Pokemon world, Gengar would be adding new rules to that dang thing every single day, unlike anything as to what Canada started it out with. And yes, to explain that briefly before we move on to our next entry, Canada was one of the primary reasons, if not the primary reason, the Geneva Convention even exists. When they went to war, the idea was to end war as soon as possible by any means necessary. And that is the real G-Max terror right there. He's making a list, he's checking it twice, he's gonna find out who's naughty or nice, and Kingler will dissolve your body. Yeah, I know the time of year it is. I'm gonna defend myself. I'm not trying to move Christmas ahead of Halloween. That, Halloween's my favorite holiday, but Gmax Kingler here 1000% has some level of inspiration from Santa Claus. I mean, look at that bubbly beard. It legitimately does as well have a very high alkaline level for its bubbles and directly states that any opponent struck by them will have their bodies melt away quickly. This is a very legitimate thing as well. Alkaline-based batteries are a perfect example, as you don't want to get that liquid inside of your body, let alone on top of it. In fact, when my lovely German Shepherd Jaeger was but a puppy, he ended up breaking open a toy and crunched a battery. He didn't eat it, and not knowing if he had actually gotten any of the alkaline material inside of him, rushed him to the vet, checked him out, and then he was put on a bland chicken and rice diet with antacids to ensure that his stomach acid doesn't become more acidic and eat away at his stomach lining. He is a very happy, healthy boy that gets a walk every single morning before I start work these days. But with Kingler, as if the bubbles weren't deadly enough, that strong left arm it has is even stronger, just being described as being able to destroy anything it hits. Now, normal Kingler has a 10,000 horsepower level arm, so I can't imagine what that changes to in this G-Max form. And horsepower is basically saying that 33,000 pounds can be moved 1 foot 1 minute with that level, and it's often used for vehicles because it basically tells you how much the car can carry and still move. Using it for a crab's claw is odd, but not the worst, I suppose, if you actually do the work and put it in the right context. Now, Kingler is based on a number of different crabs, but here it is specifically, potentially, based on Japanese spider crabs with their scarily long legs. But that bubble beard may be a reference to the fact that crabs blow bubbles to keep oxygen flowing to the gills when they are out of the water. Crabs have to keep their gills moist when outside the water, sealing in moisture and storing water in various parts of their body in order for them to continue breathing. And Gmax Foam Burst, or simply Foam in the direct translation, just blasts the foe with water and foam and lowers all opponents' speed by 2 stages. I suppose it is a stickier, foamier substance that it then produces, so sure, it makes sense. But that also means that it is shooting its liquid at you, and the bubbles themselves are, assumedly, composed from their alkaline fluid, so anything hit by this is probably getting instantly dissolved to absolutely nothing. Simple, but terrifying. 5,000 people can ride on the shell of Gmax Lapras for a very comfortable ride without any issues. Lapras can use its giant ring of ice particles to break any icebergs that may prevent it from swimming, and according to Oleana, Gigantamax Lapras' shell is not part of the main body, as the shell has the logarithmic spiral structure. I'm not going to sit and doubt Oleana. She's actually incredibly intelligent, and this is shown a little bit better through the Pokemon Twilight Wings mini-series. And so with a little bit of searching, we can find out that this is a curve that is similar to that of a Nautilus shell. This is also something we see with Ammonite, the Helix fossil, and luckily I have my handy-dandy real Helix fossil, which is just an Ammonite fossil. And as you can see here, it spirals around. The logarithmic part is just the fancy pants math that has been used to accurately describe the type of spiral or curve that is present as it gets larger and larger as it extends outwards. We also see this in snails, meaning that through the many examples that we do have of the logarithmic spiral structure, that the shell that Lapras has here is genuinely not part of its body. Its shell has also been referenced to look like that of an ocarina, which I guess it kinda does, but I don't really think that fits. What of course does fit is that its shell is a full cruise ship, now able to ferry far more people, though I'm not really sure that would ever be a good idea considering the Gmax form does not last long, but it is stated in the Pokédex that it is a comfortable ride without shaking or swaying, so clearly someone has tried, and it all turned out just fine. Its move Resonance, or Melody, deals damage as per usual, and then sets up Aurora Veil to reduce damage for 5 turns without the need for Hail. And considering Aurora Veil typically is only used during hail or snow, being what makes up a part of this attack in its mechanic, it's fairly clear that those particles that are created after everything blasts down then act as a barrier to cushion the blow from enemies. So essentially, after this gigantic spirit bomb of ice slams down and creates a mini ice age, the broken ice particles are then used to create a shield for Lapras in battle, which is pretty dope. Eevee becomes far fluffier than before, and due to the fur becoming fluffier and more luxurious, enemies caught in it will become enamored and lose the will to fight. Eevee becomes even more playful and rambunctious after G-maxing, desiring to play with its opponents and often unintentionally crushing them with its size. This is by far one of my favorite G-Max descriptions of them all. It's just a massive baby trying to play, only resulting in a catastrophe as lives are just lost left, right, and center. And I bet it gets all sad for a split second, thinks everyone is sleeping, and then runs off to try and play with other people who it will then crush and then repeat the process. Though this brings up a very interesting point, because despite these being new forms, these Pokemon who are filled with incredible energy somehow don't have their personalities changed. If anything, they might have their personalities made a little bit stronger in some capacity, but that's really it. Whereas Mega Evolution might change the personality of a Pokemon dramatically. I'm not counting Z-moves or better yet Totem Pokemon or Terastallization in this because they don't make the exact same kind of change. So for some reason, despite the massive increase in energy, it doesn't make G-Max Pokemon go absolutely nuts, with exception to what happens on the darkest day, I suppose. I don't really have an answer as to why this is the case, but it might be similar to the concept of a glass of water being full. In the case of a Mega Pokemon, the glass is overfilled and somehow the water, not spilling out, is about to cause the glass to shatter open without any level of control. With Gmax, the energy is immense, but the glass has also been made larger to accommodate the sheer influx of energy that is there, or the sheer amount of water that is being contained within it. And that's the way I'm going to think about it from now on until there's a better theory or way to talk about it. But of course, this Pokemon's, Eevee's, signature move is just Gmax Cuddle or Kyodai Hug, which will damage the target and make all opponents of the opposite gender of the user become infatuated. This is the equivalent of getting absolutely mangled and still going, "Oh, he's just a baby," which I'm 1000% sure was a thing in Invader Zim with a hamster named Mega Peepee, which, yeah, that was a thing. But what else is there to say? It doesn't matter if you're the opposite gender or not, you're getting slammed by Eevee and then forgiving it afterwards because it's just that cute. Can Snorlax already eat muck as though it were just a bit of spice? Absolutely! Want to see that thing become even more powerful? You know it! With this form, it almost never moves. Even when in battle, it only slightly lifts its body and attacks by flailing its arms and legs. However, its attacks are very powerful. Gmax Snorlax is actually considered to be one of the strongest Dynamax Pokemon to have been discovered in lore. Now, Snorlax actually has a lot going on here. Firstly, all of that power that it stores up from doing absolutely nothing all the time is finally being unleashed in some capacity here. I only say some capacity because you and I both know that it isn't even using a salt's pinch worth of effort or energy to actually attack you, which makes it all that more terrifying in my opinion, considering that it is hardly moving and hardly trying at all, and is yet still one of the strongest in lore out there. We better pray it actually never puts effort into anything it does, or we are all dead. So don't have a plate of pancakes and then deny Gmax Snorlax its delicious, scrumptious meal, or you will die. Now, one Pokédex entry explains the presence of the tree on its body. Gmax energy has affected stray seeds and even pebbles that got stuck to Snorlax, making them grow to a huge size, which implies that this energy changes inorganic matter as well, which, of course, when we go back to that radiation angle for the explanation or inspiration of Dynamax energy, it checks out pretty well. But I find it more interesting that the seeds don't just become larger, we get a whole tree growing on Snorlax's stomach here. This plays into its signature, Gmax Replenish or Kyodai Regeneration, which inflicts damage as per usual and has a 50% chance of restoring any berries consumed by the user or its allies. This then makes me wonder if this is how Galar has one of its ways to replenish the fields and environments that have been damaged over all these years from Pokemon, from the climate shift, so on and so forth. Or even if those Snorlax that do Gigantamax serve as a way to replenish the environment after they've eaten their 900 plus pounds of food a day. I would also like to say this, Snorlax's name is Kabigon in Japanese, which is stated to be derived directly from Kirby, you know the one, but to not only have it named Kirby, but also have a big old tree, which despite not being the same tree as Wispy Woods, makes me think of it. That poor tree will never catch a break. First boss, first drop every single time. I also love how backhanded the Pokédex is in its other entry of Gmax Snorlax. Terrifyingly strong, this Pokemon is the size of a mountain and moves about as much as one as well. Snorlax would be the perfect bed-rotting Pokemon, especially if you could use it as a bed, and maybe even eat some of the berries that it has. The giant landfill that Garbodor becomes has always fascinated me. I never hated this Pokemon like it seems people often do. I at least like Trubbish, but look at the sheer number of things that have been deposited into its Gmax form. Dolls, planes, a cruise ship, cars, buildings, and while all of those are actually little toys that have been supersized, you could also find a Master Ball and a dead Magikarp on its backside. Poor Magikarp, but at least it looks like it was eaten, considering the way that the bones are left behind, might have even been eaten by a human. Though the secret here is that Garbodor's toxic gases become thicker and congeal into all of these items apparently. I'm not sure if that's the Pokédex lying to us to make sure kids don't think that their toys are being thrown away, or if that is the absolute truth. Nevertheless, the toxins it sprays you with are just as deadly, if not more so than before, because as it expels it from its mouth and fingers, engulfing you in their miasma, the toxins are stated to seep in all the way down to your bones. Which, once more, there are toxins proven to be a major cause of bone loss or have the ability to disrupt bone construction, repair, and more. Meaning that this isn't an exaggeration or unrealistic, and I feel bad for whoever got sprayed by this dude. Gmax Malodor, or Stink, is its signature, and it simply releases a wave of green sludge from its body at the opponents, leaving all opponents poisoned. It's just all the forbidden jungle juice that goes at the bottom of the trash bag, now bursting out and inflicting pestilence upon your enemies, and it's pretty disgusting, and this thing needs to have some rules put on it regarding the Geneva Convention as well, because it's gross. Final note though, I didn't realize it until it was pointed out to me, but the plane will change red for its shiny, and as such, the plane might be a reference to Latios and Latias, especially since it has like the white ring and then the white dot at the center, very reminiscent of how their heads look. The 400 candy metal golem itself, Melmetal. When it G-maxes, it becomes the large cyclopean giant as told in Legends. The head is shaped like a knight's helmet, and it can use its elastic and flexible body to land punches on foes while keeping its distance. By bringing the hex nuts of its fists together, it can create gigantic fists for an even bigger punch. Gmax Melmetal can also release tremendous electric beams from its belly, capable of vaporizing opponents and even an entire hill. The electricity is generated by the flow of liquid metal stored in its body. Now, considering this Pokemon may be based on gallium or mercury, this allows us to explain how this is possible. Both are metals that melt at lower temperatures than any other metals, they can both conduct electricity, and they easily react with other metals to form alloys and amalgams. This even allows the explanation as to why they eat metal, simply changing the idea of them easily reacting to other metals into the idea of them easily digesting other metals. I would also love for this to be our smoking gun as to where Melmetal comes from, but nope. Melmetal's Sword Dex entry, which is only found technically in Pokemon Home, states, in a distant land there are legends about a cyclopean giant. In fact, the giant was a Melmetal that was flooded with G-Max energy, which makes this complicated, because Pokemon Home is a separate location, but the entry is attributed to Galar's Pokedex, keeping the home region ambiguous. We can only hope that this is actually just another reference to the potential future region where we would get a lot of the Greek backgrounds added in. Though comparisons have also been made to not just the Cyclops, but also Balor. In Irish mythology, Balor or Balar was a leader of the Fomorians, a group of malevolent supernatural beings, and considered the most formidable. He is often described as a giant with a large eye that wreaks destruction whenever it is opened. And while Irish myth was pulled heavily into the region, primarily into the DLC to my understanding, something about that feels off to me. Then again, there are a number of giants that you could say that it gains inspiration from, such as the Cyclops brothers who made Zeus's Thunderbolt, Polyphemus, whose name means a few things, but at least here it can pull from the meaning of abunding in songs and legends. And now I have Ruthlessness from the musical stuck in my head, and I blame all of you for no good reason. Signature move Meltdown is the only one so far that is the same in both languages, and Gmax Meltdown inflicts damage and subjects the target and its allies to the effects of Torment, preventing them from using the same move twice in a row. However, unlike the actual move, it wears off after 3 turns. And I'll be real, I just do not know how getting absolutely pin-cushioned by spikes larger than their body, which should be not only turning you into a donut, but going so much further in eviscerating you, how that would have an effect, or this results in this type of effect. The name makes sense. It's like a meltdown in a power facility while also being a relative pun, as Meltan, melts down a part of itself to cause this attack to happen, theoretically speaking. And so the meltdown then prevents you from using all of your resources, as your move then needs a cooldown thanks to the torment. That's just me trying to piecemeal it together, and otherwise it's just a clever pun, and I'm ready to move on. Time to talk about my favorite bird Pokemon, mainly because it is a Corviknight. Its wings have streaks of Dynamax energy flowing through them, which allows it to whip up winds more forceful than any hurricane could muster. The gusts blow everything away. The 8 feathers on its back are called blade birds, and they can launch off of its body to attack foes independently. Nice and easy. When we look at what has been stated on Bulbapedia, we find the following as a great basis for what's happening through Corviknight's normal information. Corviknight may be based on a raven, a carrion crow, or the western jackdaw. All 3 are corvids commonly found in Great Britain. Its overall appearance may be based on Black Knight characters from medieval settings. It may also draw inspiration from the Ravens of the Tower of London, a group of at least 6 ravens kept at the Tower of London who are believed to protect the crown and the tower. These ravens, I found out, have entire websites dedicated to them and their significance. One such website, the toweroflondon.uk, states, "The origin of the tower's raven mythology is enveloped in the mists of time, with various tales and historical accounts contributing to the legend. Some stories suggest that the raven's presence dates back to the reign of Charles II, who ordered their protection after being warned that the crown and the tower would crumble without them. Others believe the ravens arrived much earlier, drawn to the site's ancient mystical significance. Regardless of their origins, the ravens have become an integral part of the tower's identity, with their well-being considered a matter of national interest. The birds are cared for by the Raven Master, a designated Yeoman warder who ensures their health and safety, a position that underscores the seriousness with which the legend is taken." I'm just gonna quit everything and I'm gonna go be a Yeoman warder. I require to be one with the ravens. Either that, or one with the Patus, or one with the bearded vultures, all 3 of them being top tier birds. Corvids have also been commonly associated with knights and warfare in several myths or legends stemming from the British Isles, solidifying the concept of Corviknight's overall design. And you may have even noticed that behind me there is Knight of a Raven art that is completely out of focus. That's okay, I'll throw it up on the screen. Which, that would be Remus Corbeau, played by Edward Bosco in The Unexpectables Season 1. You likely know Bosco from a number of different games and shows, including JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Pokemon, Doom Eternal, and so much more. And of course, he played one that you're, probably more familiar with being Alistair in the original Hazbin Hotel. And with this, he played into the idea of the Raven Knights. I will say, it was also very nice meeting him and getting an autograph from him alongside Connor McKinley, which was a real treat. But to bring this full circle and why I brought Bosco up is because he also did play the Corviknight taxi driver in Twilight Wings. Now, the only tie I could think of from here as to why there are 8 of these blade birds, other than just saying, yeah, there's a minimum of 6 of these Corvids at the tower, is that it could relate back to the idea of chess, the knight piece, and that the board is an 8x8, which, yeah, feels a little bit like a stretch, but considering intelligence and knights being tightly related to this, I couldn't just leave it out. Signature move G-Max Rage or Wind Strike inflicts damage and removes the effects of screen-creating moves and entry hazards, such as spikes or stealth rock on the target's side of the field, along with any terrains. Pretty simply fits into this whole idea of being able to blow anything away as per its information. As Gigantamax Orbeetle, its body and brain drastically increase in size to resemble a flying saucer. This Pokemon's intellect and psychic capabilities are overpowering, all to the point that if it utilized every last bit of its power, it could control the minds of every living being in its vicinity. Here's the problem I have with this. How do they know this? How do they know how far the vicinity is or the range of it is? Because while this implies that there is a distinct range, we are not told what that measured range is. Oh, but wait, it doesn't stop there, because it can also control gravity itself. Through its G-Max move Gravitas, or Orbit, it inflicts damage and intensifies gravity for 5 turns. This big ol' UFO ladybug is a deadly one, yet it apparently hasn't caused any mass cataclysms to our knowledge. Now, the idea of mind control or zombification in insects isn't all that foreign, whether it be through pheromones, parasites, or some other form I'm unaware of. There are plenty of living creatures that can affect the behavior of other species. In the case of Orbeetle here, some people believe that the mind-controlled aspect specifically could reference Dinocampus Cocinelli. I really need to brush up my Latin. A wasp that lays its eggs on ladybugs. As the wasp's larva hatches and pupates, it releases a virus that paralyzes its host ladybug, controlling the ladybug into protecting it from predators. The ladybug in this state is often compared to zombies in many studies. Additionally, the adult of this wasp has bright blue-green eyes and a thin body like Orbeetle has, but unlike real-life ladybugs. It may also be inspired by the steel blue ladybird, which has a similarly sloped carapace, especially when we look at its shiny colors, which honestly the body of that creature also looks a little bit like a UFO. Again, cryptids are strange in the Pokemon world because the more you think about it, the more that they are just not cryptids but actually real. In Pokemon, aliens are real. Abomasnow is the abominable snowman, and so many other Pokemon are just our myths brought to life in their world. It feels as though being superstitious would be a necessary part of common science there, which Cynthia was a really good myth researcher, arguably the best. Moving on to our snapping turtle Dreadnaught, it learns to stand on 2 legs, and as it brings its head into its body, it resembles the bowsprit of a ship. And while it might just use its massive body to crush you, it will then, if you're somehow still alive, use those massive jaws to finish you off. They can bite through metal towers, and when combined with its powerful extendable neck, it can punch a hole through a mountain with one strike. There is a tale that states it once stopped a flood by using rubble from a mountain it chewed up. First, I am not doing any defined calculations to figure out the kind of power needed to punch a hole through a mountain like that. I kinda did it in the Who's the Strongest Pokemon video, but I also used oversimplified math like I did when talking about Machamp earlier. This is also just a whole different situation. It's also fairly easy to pinpoint Dreadnaught as being inspired by the alligator snapping turtle, which are really big. I've seen one in person, at least within the Shed Aquarium. But now that we look at its Gmax form, it resembles a Dreadnaught. Its boat-like underside, most notable in its Gmax form, and armored top, makes it resemble early ironclad warships, which were built from the hulls of wooden ships and plated with thick steel sheets. Dreadnaught would also play into part of its name, just like the emotion of dread and the action of gnawing on something for dread gnaw. Strange to me though is that its Gmax move Stone Surge, or Rock Formation, but despite being a rock name, it is still a water-based move. Though this becomes a little bit less strange when we find out that it creates a stealth rock on the target's side of the field. We could not only compare this to sharp rocks hiding in the water below the surface, which a reinforced hole with multiple layers would be great to guard against, but we could also look at the idea of turtles sticking only their heads out of the water. In fact, snapping turtles may use an ambush strategy in order to hunt, concealing themselves in mud or vegetation, for example, before they lunge at their prey. Alternatively, though, they can just stay perfectly still and leave their mouths open with their tongue wiggling like a worm, before other fish, birds, small mammals, baby alligators, and even other turtles may take the bait. Then it's dinner time. Coalossal piles on the coal into a mountain, and its body now has furnace openings to let out heat from its body, as it now is a colossal stove. With Gigantamax energy stoking the fire, its flames burn hotter than 3600 degrees Fahrenheit. This makes it on par with Gmax Charizard's heat, but there's more to this. When Galar was hit by a harsh cold wave, this Pokemon served as a giant heating stove and saved many lives. Galar has canonically had a massive climate shift in the past, and it is because of this shift that we have many of our Galarian Pokemon. Not just the regional variants, I also mean many of the other Pokemon who are built to withstand incredibly harsh environments. What may have happened is Gmax Coalossal may have been in groups, or alternatively, the sheer amount of heat one was able to let off in this form allowed it to cause a shift in the weather to protect people. Which, if it did that, then there was definitely a high risk of a tornado or a hurricane, unless somehow there was very little to no moisture in the air, which I suppose is possible, but I would dare say unlikely. Galar just kind of really has it rough, and again, this is speculative. Well, it gets a little bit rougher because Gigantamax Coalossal can use G-Max Volcalith, otherwise known as Volcanic Ejecta, which then causes a giant stone slab to rise from the ground. The stone slab then falls down, shattering into pieces of stone that are all sent flying around Gigantamax Coalossal. That slab may very well be ripping the ground down to the bedrock, or in some areas, it may even include the bedrock. It depends on just how deep bedrock lays below the surface. Either way, that can still be a bit rough because now a massive chunk of land is missing and can then cause additional shifts in the soil, change where water flows, and so much more. I don't even want to think about if that could go as far as affecting tectonic plates, considering its name relation to the volcanoes. My logic is becoming less and less relevant with gargantuan monsters of this size. It's like saying, oh no, all the ants are gonna die when the world is exploding. The scale is incomprehensible. Now, there are a few Pokemon who share a G-Max form, Flapple and Appletun being a pair of them. Not only do they become larger, but now they are back in an absolutely massive apple overflowing with sweet nectar. And unlike Kingler, who might try to dissolve you with its acidic bubbles, this G-Max form will just drown you in the excessive amount of sweet, sticky nectar that it blasts at you. And it's not as though it's the same consistency of water. No, it has thickened and has a higher viscosity, enough that it can absorb damage from attacks. So we're talking about drowning in honey or molasses. This form can also be related to the candy apple, caramel apple, or baked apple. All are pretty fitting, especially when we consider the first two and the idea that Dipplin would eventually be arriving in the future in comparison to when Sword and Shield was released. Though the two Pokemon do have a different signature move in their G-Max form. One being G-Max Tartness, also being called Acid Attack, and the other one just being G-Max Sweetness, which plays into them evolving from their respective Tart and Acidic Apple, or the Sweet Apple, which counteracts said Tartness. G-Max Tartness inflicts damage and reduces target's evasiveness, while Sweetness inflicts damage and heals the user and its active allies of their status conditions. Both of the animations are the same as well, with the seeds being thrown out only to result in grass and massive apples appearing before the typical explosion of energy that we see with these moves. The loss of evasiveness kind of makes sense because of the standpoint of nectar being thick and making it hard for the opponent to move, but the healing factor being tied to sweetness is just from, I don't know, the healing feeling or the warmth of a good apple pie in your stomach. I'm just gonna go with that because nothing makes sense to me otherwise. Now the question is, why did both of them become the same G-Max? I imagine it's because they prefer being able to hide in an apple. It makes them most comfortable. On one hand, Flapple has dissolved the insides and flies around. On the other hand, Appletun is basically fused with the apple. In both cases, they are still hunted because they look like food to other Pokemon and they are forced to defend themselves. They feel likely exposed and unsafe. So they return back to their more wormy form so they can also have a giant apple and feel comfortable once again. Honestly, it's kind of like Convergent Evolution, similar to what we see with Pokemon in Paldea. I'll admit it, I don't really care about Silicobra or Sandaconda, but them becoming this massive tornado of a sandstorm with its nose prepped and ready to fire more cannonballs of sand is actually incredibly cool. Masses of mottled brown sand overflows from its neck pouch and swirls around it, exceeding 1 million tons in weight. 1 million! They could have just said 2 trillion pounds and we'd be on our way, but either way, that is absurd, and the only comparison I have is that, at least noted in 2024, about 50 billion tons of sand was mined annually worldwide, or at least that was the statistic that was brought up. This is 40 years of sand effectively that Sandaconda is just holding on to or surrounding itself with. Its Pokédex states that the sand moves with such speed and power that it could pulverize a skyscraper. But what terrifies me more is the idea of it slowly approaching a skyscraper or people and watching as that sand slowly scrapes everything down to nothingness, like someone trapped on a sandpaper treadmill, ground to dust, and then added to this repertoire of sand. The inspiration for this is fairly simple as it relates back to the Dust Devil or Dirt Devil, which are typically strong, well-formed, and relatively short-lived whirlwinds. And according to Guinness World Records, unlike tornadoes which are formed by supercell storms, Dust Devils form from the ground upwards in sunny conditions. There are only 2 recorded incidents of fatalities caused by them. The first on 19th of May 2003, when a dust devil caused a house to collapse in Lebanon, Maine, USA, resulting in the death of 1 man. The second happened on 18th of June 2008, when a dust devil caused a shed to collapse near Casper, Wyoming, USA, resulting in the death of 1 woman. And now we have Sandaconda creating something that is just as strong, actually stronger than that of a regular tornado, theoretically speaking, while still flinging sand around, which it will then do on purpose with its move Sandblast or Sandstorm, which will then keep you trapped afterwards. I hope you like the Texas Dust Bowl, because here's your sequel. You're literally getting physical tons of sand dropped on you and your Pokemon. You're lucky you even survived this far. Another Pokemon that technically has 2 forms but isn't 2 separate Pokemon that has a singular Gmax is Toxtricity. This form was even shown to be carved in that hill that I talked about earlier within Galar, and on top of that, these Pokemon have statues near the Hullbury Lighthouse that states the 2 of them defended the lighthouse in the past. This event is assumed to have occurred during the events of the Darkest Day. This would then mean that despite everything, despite Gigantamax causing many Pokemon to go wild, there were other Pokemon who could maintain their control and keep others safe despite the newfound Gigantamax size, or Dynamax size. And while in the games there are a bunch of other Pokemon or people depicted on this hill, one of them is taken to represent Mew in the anime and how it had a presence in the region in the past, which within the games this isn't really the case, but at least within the anime this would imply only one other thing: that Mew was a big reason why some Pokemon were able to stay in control and protect the region. Mew does have theoretically infinite capabilities in terms of its moves, so that may be all it needs in order to restore their minds. Alternatively, if you really want to cross the streams, you can consider that in the Pokemon Adventures manga, if you had soil from the birthplace of Mew, you could actually use it to calm Pokemon, even if they're in the middle of a rage, as long as they were born on the planet. Now imagine what the actual Mew could do in place of that soil. I'll just let you believe what you would like to believe, but it gets really shaky here in terms of what is canon across all mediums and what isn't. Nevertheless, with our ballin' high and low-key Toxtricity, their transformations combine them together, and then they bear a transmission tower and conductor coils on their back end. It can store up to 1 million liters of poison. This poison penetrates Gmax Toxtricity's brain and causes it to go berserk, leaking toxic sweat all over its body like acid rain. To attack, Gigantamax Toxtricity uses its stored electricity to create a guitar-shaped mass and slams it down towards opponents, similar to the act of guitar smashing real rock singers may have done. It can also build up more electricity than any thundercloud as well. The energy and momentum of this attack are powerful enough to create a giant crater. So despite being named a hero, Toxtricity has some intense power behind it and can cause immense damage. It is one of my favorite Pokemon from this generation. It's just really cool. Plus, the second I got that diaper baby Toxin from the daycare, I held it up in my arms towards the sky and just told it, "You are the Magikarp of this region, and I will love you with all of my heart." It's also the only Pokemon I never nicknamed because, as an old friend of mine said, Toxtricity is the kind of name that I would come up with on my own. Either that or I would call it G-String. Now, G-Max Stun Shock or Electric Shock is its signature move, which, of course, inflicts damage on a single target and then either poisons or paralyzes all adjacent foes. Either option has a 50% chance of occurring on each individual target, and if they are immune to it or would have been inflicted with it, they would not actually get the status condition, which is a heck of a way to downplay the fact that this is poisonous electricity, crashing down with more power than a thundercloud holds. Once again, I expect instant vaporization. In fact, whoever this hits should instantly vaporize and perish so harshly that their ancestors cease to exist. I will note though, the idea of this Pokemon infecting the lands of Galar with ridiculous amounts of toxic sweat is actually a little bit scary, because then that just prevents everything from growing and causes soil to erode even more. Even if we take it in the idea of the acid rain, which yes, it has a slightly more acidic level, which can cause a number of different problems, whether it be through structures or plants or otherwise, the actual acid rain isn't just immediately dissolving things, it just corrodes things, which is still a very bad thing. Look, we're just lucky that despite it having these powers, it didn't fry or just completely ruin every single water source within Galar. I'm already afraid of centipedes, and then Centiskorch comes crawling in with a drink in its hand. When Gigantamax, the number of segments and legs on Centiskorch's body increases, with a total of 100 legs, allowing Centiskorch to move incredibly fast despite its immense size. Its firepower increases, resulting in its internal temperature exceeding 1800 degrees Fahrenheit or 1000 degrees Celsius. The heat waves coming off of Gmax Centiskorch are hot enough to burn opponents and disturb the air currents to the point of causing storms to form. I originally found it weird that Centiskorch does this, but not our other fire Pokemon. This might just be because our other Pokemon can emit these intense flames at high temperatures, but their body temperatures or the rate at which these temperatures are released are not actually kept consistent. And because this is body heat, the heat assumedly comes off evenly across its entire body at that temperature and then has to disperse somewhere. And there are 246 feet or 75 meters of length of which this is dispersing from, which that is an absurd amount of heat over an absurd distance from an absurd centipede. I don't even think I'd be afraid of it being a centipede anymore. I'd be afraid of the heat that it emits, which is just common sense kicking in. And this is when we can visit yokai.com and talk about the Omikade, monstrous Mukade centipedes with dark bodies and bright orange legs and heads, a centipede yokai. They are often depicted with dragon-like features, and while their non-monstrous cousins can grow up to 20 centimeters in length, the upper size limit on yokai Mukade is not known. They are depicted to be wrapping themselves around entire mountains, have powerful venom, and will even torment dragons. A centipede fighting a dragon. No thank you! Now, an Omikade's exoskeleton is so tough that it can't be pierced by weapons, though they do have one weakness, being human saliva, which is toxic to them. And so your weapon can be coated in saliva, and then it may be able to pierce through its armor and wound it. Everybody, sprint into this pit! We must slay the Omikade! I don't know why saliva was chosen for the weakness of this yokai, and I fear it involves someone eating centipedes, which is horrifying to me. I don't care if other people in our world actually do this. I am not those people, but I will admit I'm willing to try almost any food at least once. So maybe if I'm given the chance, I would eat it, but I would never seek it out. Its signature move, Centinferno, or 100 Flames, is a pretty dope name either way, and it plays into Centiskorch's habit of wrapping around its prey before burning it to death and then eating it, as it inflicts damage and binds the target for 4 to 5 turns. This binding effect is similar to that of Fire Spin, except that it doesn't end prematurely if the user switches out or faints. In the anime, it starts coiling up and then glows bright yellow before a fireball forms, and then that gets launched at the opponent instead, which is a lot less terrifying for some reason, probably because I know I'm not going to survive a fireball. At least if it's wrapping around me, there's a relative chance that I might survive a little bit longer, and I get to see it approach me and see how close it actually gets with that centipede in my face. No thank you. Moving on. Not only does Hatterene grow, but so does all of her hair, and her witch's hat made of said hair now has 3 spiky tentacles extending from it rather than the single tentacle with 3 fingers. Known as the Raging Goddess, Gmax Hatterene has the ability to sense the emotions of creatures from over 30 miles away, and it will become enraged and attack if it senses any hostility. Its tentacles are capable of firing off energy beams akin to lightning. Now, normal Hatterene already emits psychic waves to deter others from approaching it or its territory. And if you still entered its space and are too loud, you are at risk of being torn apart by it. And now you're telling me it has become a full-on fairy tale tower, sending and receiving emotional signals so it can absolutely demolish anyone who would put it or its habitat at risk. I approve. Now, this is really a less is more design and situation, with a lot of the basic inspirations for Hatterene just being made more obvious or exaggerated here. But now that it has these far longer and pointed strands of hair, the comparison can be made to the Harionago. From yokai.com again, the fearsome yokai known as a Harionago appears at night on the roads of the island of Shikoku. In the dark, they are indistinguishable from ordinary young women, unusual only for their loose, disheveled hair. Upon closer inspection, the tip of each hair is fitted with a needle-like barbed hook. Although, if you are close enough to notice these hooks, it is probably already too late. While it doesn't have barbed hooks, the tentacles here on our Pokemon do also make me think of Malamar, and squids do have their suckers, with some squids having hooks as well. They made the comparison to a goddess incredibly clear with its G-Max move Smite, which is exactly the same in Japanese. They are not playing games around with this. The heavens themselves fall upon the enemy, stars cascading upon them, which of course results in damage and then confusion of all opponents. There are a multitude of fairy queens, some named, many unnamed, with Titania being the most prominent queen of the fairies that I'm aware of, but she doesn't seem to bear any real inspiration here. Even digging into raging goddesses didn't really help me find anything conclusive. After all, a lot of gods and goddesses just kind of go into a rage, especially if you're part of the jealous Greek pantheon. Opposite to the Pokemon meant to play the Witch of the North, we now have Grimmsnarl, who pulls some inspiration from the Wicked Witch of the West. The two of them being counterparts of each other in the games as well, especially as they both cover their bodies in extensive amounts of hair, and Hatterene is only female, with Grimmsnarl only being male. Though now in its G-Max form, it makes me think of Gurren so much, especially when we read the following. When in its G-Max form, it is capable of creating a powerful drill with its leg hair, which can bore large holes within Galar's terrain. Thanks to its increased strength, it can even jump over the world's tallest building. Now that last part seems genuinely weird to note. It's already 105 feet tall, being 32 meters. Though, when you consider that the tallest building in the world is the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, being 2,717 feet or 828 meters, and has been the tallest since 2009, we kind of get a different story, and it actually is a little bit impressive, because that is just shy of being 26 times its height. But because it's funny for me to undercut it a little bit, frogs are also noted to jump multiple times their own length, with some tree frogs, according to North Carolina Zoo, being able to jump 50 times their own length, which this is accomplished through a number of different advantages and their bodies built to allow them to jump like this. Back to G-Max Grimmsnarl though, its snooze or sleepiness G-Max move gives a 50% chance of making the target drowsy, which doesn't sound like a big deal until you realize that if this was done as the first attack, you're about to fall asleep in front of a behemoth muscle monster. In-game, only marginally scary. In lore, pretty terrifying because you're likely not the only one falling asleep, and you might be out for a while. Now, the beam it uses for this in the anime originates from either side of its head, likely just being in parallel to its ears. This has been compared to Eilen, a supernatural giant of Irish folklore that used music to put people to sleep. And according to the Boyhood Deeds of Fionn, he would burn Tara to the ground every year at Samhain with his fiery breath after lulling all the inhabitants to sleep with his music. This only ended with the arrival of Fionn Mac Camille, who inhaled the poison from his spear to keep himself awake and slew Eilen. The act won him the leadership of the Fianna, and that's actually really dope. Inhaling poison to stay awake and then fight a giant while poisoned. It's also interesting to note that poison is super effective on Grimmsnarl, which you could say plays into this inspiration a little bit more. Your 5-tier cake is ready with Gmax Alcremie, with all of them turning into this form. Its hair has even extended to resemble that of a veil, and that is because it is a wedding cake, and apparently Alcremie likes to have a train as part of their dress as it extends from the back of the cake. Now, the cream that pours from this Pokemon is endless, though if hit by a strong impact, it will harden depending on the severity of the blow, allowing it to be resistant to most physical attacks. Moreover, the decorations on its body are as hard as diamonds. When attacking, Gmax Alcremie unleashes missiles made of cream, each one filled with 100,000 kilocalories. Anyone who gets hit by one of these cream missiles will be filled with energy and euphoria, but will become extremely confused and dizzy at the same time. And then also we get a One Piece reference right there, which the cake in that was also a 5-tier wedding cake. Not to say, as for clarification, that Pokemon was referencing One Piece. It could have, but I don't think that's the case here. But even then, once again, in there, that cake was so absolutely filled with sugar and tastes so amazing that it did fill people with euphoria, so much so that they became immobilized. I don't know where this idea originates from, but I assume it's just the idea of something tasting so amazing that you just cannot move anymore, or you just get onset sudden diabetes, I suppose. Copperajah gets transported into Minecraft, or actually more aptly, it's the equivalent of when Jerry from Tom and Jerry eats an entire wedge of cheese and his body now matches that shape. I'll be real, I forgot this Gmax form even existed in the first place, and when I first saw it, I just stared at it in a tired stupor and just kept asking, why does it look like that? Why does it look like that? I didn't even realize it was standing on its back legs either, as it's now bipedal, which just makes it that much more goofy with its arms hanging off to the side helplessly. I legitimately had to just give up and type, why does Gmax Copperajah look like that? And the only common consensus is that people would say that maybe it's a reference to a Thwomp from Mario, but even they aren't sure. I'm just gonna accept that before my brain eats itself alive, wasting calories trying to think of why it looks this way. I like goofy Pokemon, I really do, but I love finding the inspirations behind them so much more, and there's just nothing clear here. It's just a wall with a nose, and I beg you in the comments to educate me if you have a reasonable idea that makes sense within the European history that ties to this Pokemon, or because it is representative of the Indian elephant and has been drawn in from India canonically, well, the Pokemon world's equivalent of India, maybe there's something from there that I'm missing. Otherwise, apparently it has so much power packed within its trunk that if it were to unleash that power, the resulting blast could level mountains and change the landscape. Otherwise, Gmax Steel Surge, or Steel Formation, is the same exact animation as Melmetal's Gmax move, with the exception of the color, and now there's an entry hazard being left behind as there are now sharp spikes on the field. Nothing to really write home about, unfortunately. The last Gmax Pokemon we get before the ones that were introduced in the DLC is Duraludon. Now resembling a skyscraper, even getting planes of glass to resemble windows, it specifically resembles the Shard, the tallest building in the UK, which it was formerly known as London Bridge Tower, allowing a nice little reference hidden away for when Duraludon would eventually be able to evolve into Archaludon, which I'm sure was thought up ahead of time. Parts of its body will glow due to the profusion of energy, and the hardness of its cells is exceptional, even among steel types. It also has a body structure that's resistant to earthquakes. That is actually impressively important, because when it comes to structures in earthquake-prone areas, you want something that can withstand the weight of what is going on it, or in it, per the structure, in addition to having enough sturdiness to actually stay up, while also not being too rigid. Think of it this way, if it bends too much, it falls over. If it doesn't bend at all, it'll just shatter. Hit somewhere in the middle or reinforce it the right way with the right amount of concrete or other necessary pieces. I'm not a person who builds these things, and then you make yourself an earthquake resistant structure through that. But this is still weird because Duraludon is inspired by Duralumin, and I could not find anywhere where Duraludon is being used as a material for earthquake-resistant structures. And then, of course, despite that, the shard is built to be earthquake-resistant, which is the primary reference with the G-Max form. And then its G-Max move Depletion is also called Decay, which can be related back to the idea of Duraludon and Duraludon being a material that is highly susceptible to rust. So this dragon is just all over the place. Also, I wish Tyranitar had gotten a G-Max form, since the two are stated to be rivals and it would have fit pretty well, but nope. Moving on. What if we took the flower and made it a bowl-cut flower cap? That's how we get G-Max Venusaur. These flowers have a taller bud and extraordinarily thick, springy petals capable of shielding Gigantamax Venusaur. It attacks with its thick vines, which are powerful enough to topple down a 10-story building, which that's more impressive when you keep in mind the reinforcement needed across the building or even at just the base of a 10-story building. Otherwise, you misunderstand it to be as easy as knocking over a Jenga tower, and that's the Pokédex actually saying if it just happens to hit a 10-story building, not if it actually tries to knock it over. I was very close to looking up how such a thing would happen, and then I thought to myself that I'm probably on enough lists from all the research or things that I look up, and I don't need to be put on another one. Now, Venusaur's flower here can similarly spread enough pollen to resemble a volcanic eruption. Breathing in this pollen can cause uncontrollable sneezing, and inhaling large amounts can even cause fainting. However, this Pokemon also promotes plant growth in areas where it lands, and I talked about this in my complete ecosystem of Pokemon Snap video, but this isn't the only case of a Pokemon being able to help plants of all kinds grow. Gossifleur is noted to do the same by spreading seeds of all kinds throughout the Lentil region. And as for why this happens, whether it be those seeds or Venusaur's pollen, we can kinda assume that they are compatible with all plants because pretty much every single grass-type Pokemon is in the grass egg group, meaning they are all compatible with each other. In terms of inspiration, G-Max Venusaur, it's kinda known that the Venusaur line as a whole are known to represent or resemble Rafflesia arnoldi, and I'd say with the way that the petals are bending now, it resembles it just a little bit more depending on the photos you might see of it, though that pointed crown at the center does stand out quite a bit and makes me think of a lily pad's flower with no other proper inspiration that I can pull that from. Throughout all of its evolutions, it has always put plenty of energy into its flower, so this isn't as abnormal as it might seem at first glance. And G-Max Vine Lash, or Whipping, is as simple as it sounds, as at the end of every turn, it will also deal non-grass type foes equal to 1/6 of their maximum HP in damage, which makes it sound like the pollen is taking effect and we are sneezing our life away. Pretty simple G-Max all in all. Blastoise transforms from a set of cannons to a 31 cannon set of different sizes with a battleship-like formation. The 12 cannons around the main one are able to attack in any direction, and through this mass array, it can adapt to any situation using various cannon combinations. It is not very good at precise shooting, so instead of aiming its attacks, it prefers to overwhelm its opponents by launching dynamic, powerful torrents from its cannons. It's basically the equivalent of the Prohibition-era mobsters in the movies. Though this is literally what it does, jokes aside, when it uses G-Max Cannonade or Kyodai Bombardment, which has the same effect as G-Max Venusaur's. And according to one legend, its main cannon is so staggeringly powerful that it can blast holes through the mountains. Is this just the power scaling of Pokemon and I haven't realized it till now? They just start with dump trucks and then end with destroying mountains? Because that's what it feels like. Either way, we have a full-on battleship here, anti-aircraft cannons and all. But it is said it may also be based on Leonardo da Vinci's design for an armored fighting vehicle, which that was already inspired by a turtle's shell. This thing looks like a very pointy UFO, and from one of his letters addressed to Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, written around 1482, we get a description of the intent of the design. I will make protected wagons, reliable and impregnable, which, piercing the enemy's ranks with the fire of their artillery, will destroy him. no matter how great the number of his soldiers. The infantry can follow the tanks without suffering great losses and without encountering any resistance, which it kind of made me laugh, but that's probably the same exact thought pattern that people from the beginning of time to the modern day have kind of had. Destroy everyone that opposes us with unstoppable power, without any losses, and without slowing down. And to be fair, you might be able to say the tank was a great example of that, which, you know, Blastoise and them kind of represent in some capacity, until people found weaknesses in hulls and undersides, or simply through well-placed explosives. No matter how powerful something man-made is, it will always have a weakness, which kind of along the same lines of if it bleeds, it can die, but mine is not nearly as powerful of a quote. Now that we're at Rillaboom, I can actually finally say that I found it really weird that the starters of Galar didn't immediately have G-Max forms, or how the Kalos starters didn't have Mega forms, unless you want to count Greninja's Battle Bond form, but maybe that'll change with Legends ZA coming out. But that aside, Rillaboom has always loved its drumming sticks and nature since it was but a little Grookey. And now it loves it so much that instead of taking in the G-Max energy for itself, it instead turns it towards nature, creates 4 massive arms made of leaves for itself, like a Dr. Octopus situation, and then creates a full drum set for itself to go, and I dare say, ape shit with. That may be the only time in a video where I've sworn without censoring it. But its upper body has now fused with its drum, and the energy within itself compels it to perform transcendental drumming techniques, controlling its drumsticks as if they were its own limbs. The sound it makes can reach across oceans and other regions, and it is said that the beat can cause whoever hears it to start dancing uncontrollably. Get the transcendental cha-cha-cha song in here from Tom Cardy, please. Now the inspirations for this blend once again, one being that a gorilla may make drumming sounds by beating their chests to show social dominance rather than actually fighting with each other, because that fighting takes a lot of energy and effort and nobody wants to do that. In addition, the full G-Max form likely draws inspiration from modern rock drummers. As Bulbapedia states, given the UK-inspired setting of Galar and James Turner's British background, Gigantamax Rillaboom's concept may have been influenced by a famous 2007 advertising campaign for Cadbury chocolate in the United Kingdom. This campaign depicted a gorilla playing drums to the tune of Phil Collins' "In the Air Tonight." And of course, its G-Max move is drum solo or drum beat. Alright, you know I couldn't resist it for too long. But anyway, that ignores all ignorable abilities, and during the execution of this move, multiple giant roots appear out of the ground and strike at the opponent, which I hope you're prepared to become plant food. It's also now that I will state that I usually choose grass starters throughout my life, which is just me unconsciously liking them a lot more, which is why I have Bulbasaur and Chikorita behind me, Chikorita being my first ever starter that I ever had, with Cyndaquil to actually follow, which I do love, and was the only other exception when I played Legends Arceus. But there is one other exception in which I chose Sobble when I first played Sword and Shield as my starter, because it suckered me into choosing it with all of its crying. And I am reminded of my mistakes every single day, as I do love Grookey more. Sorry, Sobs. In line with enlarging powers, but not oneself for the most part, Cinderace now aura farms on top of its massive fireball, big ol' floppy ears waving in the breeze behind it, just like what we'd expect in the Gurren Lagann anime. Once more, I don't know why, but for some reason, Sword and Shield makes me think of Gurren Lagann. It also turns out this fireball does range in size and sometimes exceeds 300 feet or 90 meters in its entirety. I haven't really talked about the heights of these Pokemon in their G-Max forms at all, but for comparison, a 2-story house is typically between 20 and 25 feet tall. G-Max Corviknight and Orbeetle are tied for the smallest G-Max at 45 feet and 11 inches or 14 meters. We are minuscule by comparison. But back to Cinderace, using its well-honed techniques and fighting spirit, it can make its fireball chase after almost any opponent like it has a mind of its own, and thus this attack that it has will never miss. roasting the opponent in the process. Gmax Cinderace is still a threat even without its Fireball, as it is said to have the strongest leg strength of any Pokemon, and being able to even overwhelm other Dynamax Pokemon just by kicking them. I'll also note though that even outside of this form, its Fireball may be used to blind its opponents, so I imagine that it would still do the same with its Gmax form. Ultimately, there are no additional inspirations beyond what normal Cinderace has from its association with football or soccer, and Libero being its hidden ability, which is also a position within soccer. And its signature move Fireball is pretty clear cut, especially as it also ignores all abilities of the opponent. Extending its tail to a length of over 130 feet or 40 meters long, Inteleon has created a sniper tower for itself. Its hidden body tools have been enhanced, and it can now gauge temperature, air pressure, wind, and humidity with its crest and nictitating membranes. That was a weird word to say. Together with its sharp mind, this extremely skilled sniper can figure out exactly how to use gravity for a precise trajectory shot fired at Mach 7. This allows it to hit even a moving berry that is 9 miles or 15 kilometers away with ease. Mach 7 is clocked at 5,370 miles per hour and is very easily faster than any round that has ever been fired to my knowledge, while also traveling over double what the farthest a round has traveled. For perspective, you might think it's absurd that all of these factors are being measured, but the further you go, the more these things actually do affect trajectory dramatically. And to be able to accurately hit an object so small while it is moving is such an absurd thing that I love it. It's a Pokemon modeled after spies, so this all clears pretty well and easy, and there is a reason as to why it's portrayed as Lloyd in Spy X Family fan art all the time. Hydro Snipe, being its signature move, is just also simply called sniping in direct translation, which ignores abilities once more and rains down pain upon the target, which it kind of feels a little bit irrelevant when you watch the animation because of the sheer amount of power that it's using. It's the equivalent of me saying I can accurately hit a ladybug from halfway across the world as long as you give me a nuclear bomb to do so with. And our final entry for today is Urshifu, a Pokemon brought up through the use of the Scrolls of Mastery, allowing it to transform into single or rapid strike style forms. These fighting style Urshifu then transform into their own distinctly colored Gmax forms, one being red and one being blue, though both are still outlined in the typical red energy you see in Dynamaxing, and that's because they are originated from Galar. They are native to Galar, or once were in the past. Which goes back to what I had mentioned at the very beginning, this idea that maybe Calyrex, the Fairy King, and then both Zacian and Zamazenta may not actually be from Galar itself. They may originate from another realm or from another location altogether. Gmax single strike style Urshifu has been called the very embodiment of rage, and a divine emissary that banishes evil spirits with its fury. It is believed that Gmax single style can rid the world of its malevolence through its terrifying expression and shouting. The shock waves released from its fists can blow away any Dynamax Pokemon with just one hit. Gmax move One Blow will hit the target even if they are protected by a move such as, well, Protect and even Max Guard. Gmax Rapid Style Strike Urshifu maintains a perfect one-legged stance in a calm and unflinching manner. Opponents who face it may either feel greatly agitated or experience a sense of relief as if freed from evil spirits. Gmax Rapid Style Strike could supposedly destroy those with evil in their hearts by simply glaring at them. And Gmax Rapid Flow or Continuous Strike does the same effect as Gmax One Blow. Now, these forms have been theorized to be inspired by fierce deities, transformed Buddhas with terrifying appearances yet noble hearts that judge and punish the spirits of the dead and additionally quell evil. Your first interaction with a fierce deity may have well been Fierce Deity Link. These deities aren't always considered good or evil. They are said to simply appear in order to destroy obstacles to the path of enlightenment. They may take on terrifying forms of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, acting as guardians against demons, and will gather sentient beings to listen to the teachings of the Buddhas. Alternatively, they may have been influenced by the Neo, the Agyo, and the Ungyo, a pair of viciously powerful Buddhist deities that ward off evil spirits and protect good spirits, as Urshifu is also capable of doing both. Typically, statues depicting Agyo will have its mouth open as a sign of violent aggression, while Ungyo will have its mouth closed to represent latent strength. Gmax Urshifu's forms seem to reverse this, as Rapid Style Strike's mouth is closed and it attacks its foes relentlessly, while Single Strikes is open and it confidently delivers a single punch to a weak point. Additionally, these statues are often colored red and blue, though the color is not a prominent trait of either, as they can each be red or blue, or sometimes both. And in terms of the real-life statues, to take them even further, I read from Taodong University archives. Although they appear ferocious, they are actually benevolent protectors. Placed on the entrances to many Buddhist temples in Japan, these guards are emanations of the Mahayana Buddhist Bodhisattva Vajrapani. I did not practice that, and I feel really good about that. Anywho, Agyo's open mouth pronounces the Sanskrit vowel sound ah, representing the beginning or life, inviting good to enter. Ungyo's closed mouth pronounces representing the end or death, and shuts out evil. Agyo is commonly placed to the right and Ungyo to the left of the temple to protect the space with the sacred syllables Aum, chanted during meditation as early as the 5th through 2nd centuries BCE. With all of that information and the ribbons flowing from their body and the powerful muscular stances that these all share, I think it becomes very clear how they were taken as inspiration for Urshifu here. But with that, we've actually completed looking through every single Gmax Pokemon and the understanding of the phenomena as a whole, or as much as we can pull from it. With that, I will say I am putting out a vote because Legends EA is coming out really soon, and I actually want to release a bunch of videos regarding Kalos, the history of it, maybe a special video on Zygarde. As such, there is going to be a poll that I release around the same time as this video is released, in which you could go vote on which video you are most excited to see next. And in addition, I do want to say thank you so much for making it this far and for watching. If you did make it this far, please do make sure that you do subscribe, leave a comment, as comments are the best way to help boost a video for free alongside watch time and hyping a video, I guess, is a new thing now. And if you would like to go the extra mile, you can always become a member of the channel on here or Patreon for as little as $3 a month, which helps the channel immensely, especially as I'm aiming to try and get a teleprompter to make it so that way I can talk to the camera a little bit easier and more naturally. But before we go, let's go and shout out all the members of the channel as a thank you. Thank you to all of our members supporting the channel, including the Gods of Hope, Dynamax 14, Heals for Life, Biggins, Vatty, Knit, Buzz, and Summer, then of our champions, Andrew, Merchants, Ghost, and Joshua, Biggins, Wilson, then all of our Knights of the Court, Vatty, Lemon, Kelsey, Hoover Covers, Luke Sassy, Crumbo, Vio, Moth Romance, Double, Shiny Gem, Sarah, Briz Boys, Fix My Nitrogen, and Krill, Dynamax 14, and Plow, Allen, Heals for Life, Blue, Dalek, and Warren Hemphill. Then finally, all of our wanderers of the channel, Mr. Hellhound, Yip, Super Saiyan Son, Goku, I assume that is, Emil Wickstrom, I wish I was drunk, oh my lord. Voidy, no. Aww. Thank you all of our members of the channel, starting with the Gods of Hope, Final Fantasy 14, Heals for Life, Biggins, Vatty, Knit, Buzz, and Summer, then champions, Andrew, Merchants, Ghost, and Joshua, Biggins, Wilson, and then the Knights of the Court, Vatty, Lemon, Kelsey, Hoover Covers, Luke Sassy, Crumbo, Vio, Mothra Manzo, Double, Shiny Gems, Sarah Briz, Fix My Nitrogen, Krill, Fantasy 14, Pile, Allen, Heals for Life, Blue Dalek, and Warren Hemphill. Then all of our wonders of the channel, Mr. Hellhound, Yep, Super Saiyan Son, Goku, Emil Wickstrom, I wish I was drunk, Voidy Reaper, JC Hero, Ocean Man 7, Tavorius, Gazian, Fossils, Ryan Schwenk, Shoot Pass Limit, Chidori, Phoenix 1, Vanny, Zamaru, Gal, Snake Sun, 520, Kagyo, Tsutsuki, Cool Breeze, Eric, Max Supreme, Shadowhawk 19, Lost Mysterio, Diswardy, Emperor, Softy and Kai, Tamarko, Zakai, Inferno, Twitch, Lydia Marie, Elder, Dennis Garcia, Lion Clan, Nathan Palmer, Sophie, Favark, The Hi-Chi, Kristen Cap, Cliv, Lumica, Daniela 808, Roger McLean, Supporting Work, Kamutalk 123, Star S, Spyro Master, Jay Gill, Abdallah Lottie, Gaming Runes 9L707, Evil Chan, Ruby, Micah 626 Gaming, Nicole Manaskian, Kristen, Sandwich Boss, Emmy, whatever this is, Michael Stein, Alolan Figment, Meneco 2873, Sydney House, Miss Zora, Dakota Couch, Brad Sundimer, Drixel, Carl Jean, Hunter Al, Hussein Kassam, Rebecca Connell, Hune, Jappy W, Memento Morum, Marshy, Edward Kosowski, Fenica Fox, Nerders, Freeberg, Hag, Addy Cadabra, King Pie, Jackals, Ross, Richie, Snivy, Addy, C, Jacob, Square, DJ Monk 23, Squidwater, Rice Smith, Gamer, Bad Dragon, I Just, JM, MD, Horseman, Cocktail, Muse, Artwell, Telumiel, Gwendolyn, Eastgander, 772, Andrew Foss, Pick Anonymous, Summon Sloth, Knocknuyan, Ian Ray, Big and C9, Corner, Dakaba, Sleeping Bear, Jericho, Summon Sloth, Unseelie King, The Vorians Guys, Daniel Tracy, Garrett Hoffman, Dylan Peters, Matt Clyde Burkhart, and Heather Weisnett. Thank you all for being members of the channel. It goes a very, very long way to support the channel and content for everybody to enjoy. If you would like to become a member of the channel, get a number of different perks, and hear your name at the end of every single video as part of the credits, then become a member for as little as $3 a month and support the channel. With that then, as always, thank you guys so much for watching. It does mean the world to me. Don't do anything I want to do. Don't think I want to do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!